Alrighty, so the first thing that we're going to be doing here is we're going to be creating the actual concept sketch of the Cactus Keychain that we're going to be creating. Very, very important that we're planning out what our design is going to look like. And so I'm first just starting off with the general form of this, and then I'm adding in the finer detail. You can also see that I've added in shading and also the annotations for my design. So after I've dated that, signed it, I'm going to go ahead and get into Onshape, and I'm going to create the Cactus Keychain file. So this is project 126. And so what I've also done is I've used a reference image too that I have brought up. Right here I'm just creating the pot, the outline of the pot. So this is going to be that bottom part of there. I'm specifying the angle of that line, and then I also specified the overall height, which I'm going to end up changing later. What I'm also going to do here is I'm going to add that little top piece to the pot to give it a little bit additional texture. At this point I'm just looking at millimeter equivalences. The 3D printer prints out in layer heights of 0.2 millimeters, so it does always help to ensure that you are printing out in increments of 0.2. Additionally, what I ended up doing here is I ended up using the fillet tool so that I can round out those edges. As we were talking about, safety is always our #1 priority, and so I made sure to fillet all those edges. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to end up changing the color. Keep in mind you do want to be using a solid color palette. You want to make sure all the colors that you're using are going to go together well. What I'm doing now is I'm just creating the outline of the actual little cactus piece. And what I'm going to end up doing is I'm creating half of this outline, right, so that then I can end up using the revolve tool to actually be able to make this 3-dimensional. Remember, we want our creations to look lifelike. What I also just did here is I clicked on the appearance of that face, and then I ended up right-clicking it so that I could change the color of just that face. So I'm going to give it that green. What I want to do next is I want to add in those little pieces, or the little thorns, as well as ridges all along. So what I just used there was the project tool so that I could end up getting a solid starting point of where the actual little cactus form begins. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use what is called the sweep tool. It allows you to take a sketch entity and then basically extrude it along a path. And so as you can see now, we've created those ridges. What I've got to do is I've got to use the circular pattern tool, and I'm going to actually select the feature pattern here so that I can end up using the circular pattern and repeat these radially, so that we've got that. One of the things I do end up doing is I switch to 8. I later end up switching back to a different number, so just keep that in mind. Some of the things, sometimes Onshape will kind of glitch out a little bit, as you can see there up at the top. So sometimes that can glitch out a little bit. We're just gonna kind of see if it ends up correcting itself later on. Usually you have to test too. If you end up exporting your STL file, you can test to see if that is retained or not, the little glitch. But as you can see now, it kind of worked itself out. But then what we're going to do here is we're going to add in that top little keychain part. Now this is one of the things that I'm thinking about is this too small currently? Remember, we want to have a very solid point of attachment, and so we want to keep that in mind. And so as I'm going through and printing this out, once we actually have the actual creation, we're going to end up seeing if this is too small or not. All right, now as you could probably guess, it is going to end up being too small. It does need to be a bit thicker, because if it's not thick enough, then it's going to end up breaking. That could be weakness of our design. What I'm doing now is we're going to go ahead and add in the X's on this. Now I was going to create a offset plane, however I just thought, okay, well I'll just create it on the front plane, extrude it out, and then what we're going to do here is we're going to actually end up using the revolve tool so that it will follow the profile of our cactus, and we're actually going to remove a 2D. We're going to basically revolve that 2D sketch around and end up removing so that it follows the profile. So you'll see what I'm talking about here very shortly, but basically we're going to create these X's and then we're going to end up extruding those. One of the mistakes that I did make is I used the spline tool. The spline tool, you actually cannot end up using the linear pattern tool, so just keep that in mind. I would use regular lines if you're creating this project, because then you can end up using the linear pattern tool so that you can basically repeat this vertically. And so as you can see here, I'm using the circular pattern just to revolve it around, right? And as you can see, I ended up running into this issue where I want the X's to be on those little ridges. And so what we're going to end up doing is we're going to change the instance count in our initial circular pattern for those ridges. We're going to make it be 6 instances. And so now, just so that these X's can work out a bit better, I ended up using 3 of those. And so now we're showing you the actual method on how we can end up creating a profile that's going to be revolved around the center axis of our cactus. And basically, we're going to create this sketch that's enclosed there, and I'm going to sweep that around, or I'm going to revolve that around, right? And I'm going to remove, and so now you can see that it follows the profile of our cactus. What we're doing in here is we're changing the colors. This is something that I had actually forgotten. It's been a while since I've been in Onshape. If you actually just end up selecting the feature over in the features list on the left side there, you can also right click each feature, and if you right click that, you can add a color to the feature, so it can save you a lot of time instead of having to click all these faces and then selecting edit face appearance. So just please keep that in mind too. But anyways, we're going to go ahead and add in the other ridges. And so this is the point where I end up finding out, man, the spline tool did not work out too well for me, because whenever I go to use the linear pattern tool, as you can see, the only thing that ends up getting copied down is just those straight lines, those edges. But what I just basically specified was the distance for each pattern, and then also how many instances I wanted. So I wanted 3. And once again, you can see that we ended up making that mistake. So what we end up doing is we're just going to end up using the regular line tool, and I'm going to pass it down here a bit of a ways, and I'm going to create these out of regular lines, so that then we can end up using the linear pattern tool. But since I did want to have the variation, I decided, hey, instead of just actually using the linear pattern tool, I'm just going to end up creating 2 additional instances of this, so that it brings in a little bit more of variation. And so now, as you can see, I end up using the transform tool so that I could move that sketch. I wanted that little thorn to be up a bit more. And so now you can see we've got these other ones created. And so what we got to do is we got to go back into that initial sketch geometry that we are basically using the revolve tool for, to basically remove those pieces that are those 2 new thorns that were rendered. So now you can see that. Now, one of the things that we do end up correcting is, if you go back, you could actually see part of this was cut out of the thorn and the ridge. So we ended up basically extending that part of the sketch out a little bit more. So what we're going to do now is we need to add in 12 lines that are going to end up basically where we're going to end up having 6 of those lining up with the actual ridges of our cacti from the top view, and then the other 6 are going to be actually right in between those 6 ridges. So basically this needs to be 360 divided by 12, which should end up giving us 30-degree increments. That way then, whenever I go to use the line angle tool for that, or sorry, the line angle option within the plane, then we can end up getting an orthographic view that's going to be orthographic to the actual ridge itself. This is just all so that we can end up creating those little thorns that you can see right now too. Those all need to be lined up with the ridges for my actual project. So right here, we're just kind of doing some trial and error, trying to test that out. What I should have done here is I should have ended up putting in 12 different repetitions of this using the circular pattern tool after I end up making that line coincident to the origin. Right here, I should have put 12. That would have saved a lot of time. And so we're just kind of going through this. What we'll probably end up doing here is just scrubbing through this so that you guys don't end up seeing this whole trial and error process. And so now we're actually creating those lines that I'm talking about that need to be incremented in between those 6 existing lines. And so now what we're going to do is dimension this. Remember, you can put in Onshape just 360 divided by 12. One of the issues that we're running into is that those lines are moving. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that they're fixed. Now these lines that I just added in though, we don't want those to be fixed. And so as you can see, those ended up turning black for some of them. And so that one that was there in the middle worked out well because that was supposed to be vertical anyways. So we're just putting 360 divided by 12. Remember, you can end up using Onshape in terms of dimensioning things out. It'll also perform those basic mathematical calculations for you, division, multiplication, and then you also can end up adding and subtracting, of course, and then I think you can also end up using trigonometric functions, so like sine, cosine, tangent. If you know about those, then you could use that. But anyways, and so now we finally got it where we're looking at the orthographic view where we're orthographic to those basically those ridges. And so now we're just adding in the X's here. I'm gonna end up switching it up. I'm gonna add in 4 X's. I'm also gonna make these a little bit smaller. So what I'm gonna try to do to just kind of give us some more variation, diversity in our thorns. And then what we're gonna be doing after this, we're gonna end up extruding those out again. And then we're gonna actually use that circular pattern tool, and we're gonna actually circular pattern the feature of the extrusion so that all those thorns will be repeated throughout. So here you can end up seeing circular pattern tool. You have to select feature pattern, then you select the extrude 3, which is that feature that we just extruded those thorns with. The axis of the pattern is gonna be down there. Now usually it'll end up showing up some red errors. You have to click that reapply feature that you just saw. And so now, since we had that profile that was swooped across, we can end up basically revolving and removing. Once again, we're going through here selecting all these faces. If you literally just go over to the features and then that feature that we use, for instance, the circular pattern tool and the extrude, you can right click those and then you can add a color to the actual feature itself, which is very, very helpful because then it basically saves you all this time, like how I'm doing this right here. Could end up saving a lot of time if I just remembered that little trick there. And so what I'm doing now is I am going through and filleting those. So I did want to fillet those out to make them better. Now, one of the things that I noticed is I had quite a bit of parts that were actually being cut off. So we were not actually revolving and removing all that material entirely. Now you can see that there's just one part over there. If you scrub back, you'll end up seeing that we had too many parts. What I'm doing now is I'm going to apply a nice little fillet to our actual keyring hole. Keep in mind, probably the biggest thing that I'm conscientious of with this design is that I think that we do not have enough material for that keyring, that location where the split ring is going to attach. And so that's one of the things that whenever we go to print this out, we're gonna test and see if it is durable enough or not. What I'm doing now is I'm just assigning material to this. We're gonna assign PLA. That's what we're gonna print out for basically 99% of the time in this class. What I can now do is if I end up going to those mass and section properties, I can end up seeing our volume. As you'll remember, biggest constraint for this project is we cannot be over, I believe it's 0.59. And so we end up being at 0.55 roughly. So we're pretty close to that threshold, but we have not passed it yet. What I'm doing now is I just basically exported my file. I'm gonna load it up into Bamboo Labs Slicer. And so now what I'm doing is I'm specifying different colors, creating my palette basically. This green, I'm gonna end up making it a little bit darker so it doesn't look too neon. What I can do is I can use the fill tool. And so now we're gonna add in this light green. We're gonna also have this dark green. And this is just gonna be for eventually like what it's gonna end up looking like in Bamboo Lab, so we can end up doing this. However, for this initial prototype, we're actually gonna be just printing it out in a single color so that we can see what our design looks like. But this is what we would do for the very final product. Or if we say had a lot of time for our prototypes, then we could end up printing it out in multiple colors. But I just want to show you all how you can end up doing the multiple colors here. But very shortly, I'm going to end up showing you the print that came out for the prototype that was just all in one single color. Alrighty, and so this is what we ended up getting for prototype 1. The top of that was a bit too thin, and so what I did is I printed out prototype 2 here, which is in grain. And so that basically, we ended up making that key ring a bit thicker. I also ended up increasing the size of the hole too to make it a bit easier for the user to actually be able to put the split keyring on there. What I'm doing right now is I'm just removing all those supports so that you can get a better look at it. But there you have it, prototype 2.